welcome back to the Deep Dive. Now, today we are undertaking a particularly heavy, but I think a profoundly necessary examination.
It really is.
Our source material takes us into the 2016 case of Cameron Rogers. It's a really tough story out of Ottawa, Canada.
And we're not just looking at the bare facts of the crime. We have these incredible excerpts from surveillance, interrogation transcripts.
What did you feel you would accomplish by killing them?
Nothing.
Nothing, eh? Okay. And what caused you to just do this?
I don't know.
Stuff that really reveals this baffling and just cold psychological landscape.
That's the mission today. Our goal is, well, it's twofold. First, to really establish a meticulous, clear chronology of the crime, tracing the emotional buildup from this sort of simmering resentment all the way to a violent eruption.
And second,
this is crucial, we have to analyze the profound emotional and psychological disconnect that you see in the defendant's own words, both right before and right after his arrest.
so we're trying to analyze the facts of this fundamental betrayal, and we're using his own voice as the primary guide. Okay, so let's unpack this unsettling story by starting right where the legal process did. I'm talking about the notorious surveillance footage and those initial confession clips.
Yeah, this material became, infamous in Canada.
And it's precisely because of the sheer awkwardness and just this emotional void in Cameron Rogers' delivery. You're watching a young man confirm he murdered his mother and father, yet his dialogue is just completely hollow. It's almost bureaucratic.
It is the emotional equivalent of discussing a flat tire. There is no urgency, no deep sorrow, and certainly no anger remaining. Nothing.
The interrogator, her name is Teresa Kelm, she is just so diligently attempting to find the emotional lever, the moment of rupture, the core reason.
She's trying to get something out of him. So she asks him directly in this attempt to humanize the act. She says, "What did you feel you would accomplish by killing them?"
And his answer is utterly chilling in its simplicity. It's not an excuse or a justification. It's pure nullification. He just says, nothing, eh?
That Canadian inflection, that casual at the end, that is what elevates this from merely flat dialogue to something deeply, deeply disturbing.
It's so jarring.
It is. He's confirming a complete lack of any measurable motivation or goal, yet he delivers it as if he's confirming the bus schedule. The inflection is the same he might use to comment on the lack of cream for his coffee.
The interrogator, she presses further. She's searching for the underlying cause. What would cause you to just do this?
And again, his response is this wall of psychological flatness. I don't know.
This is where we need to introduce the concept the source material really focuses on, which is this immediate cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. And you're seeing that dissonance in its purest form. He doesn't hesitate to confirm the facts of the crime.
No, he's very forthcoming about what he did.
Very. He's forthcoming about the physical actions themselves, but he seems utterly incapable of linking those actions to any internal state, a motive, or a future goal. You can see the anxiety in the footage, the stuttering, the nervousness.
Oh yeah, he's clearly uncomfortable.
But the substance of his answers suggests that the consequences, the why, were entirely abstract to him. The sources note he was completely aloof, despite willingly telling the authorities exactly what they needed to know.
And this psychological disconnect, it wasn't just reserved for the interrogation room. We see an immediate harbinger of this same confusion in the 911 call he made.
Right. 8 days after the murders, 120 miles away in Montreal.
120 miles.
That call, it's made late at night, 9:15 p.m., and it is a perfect, almost painful illustration of his confused and directionless state. He phones emergency services and right away says, "I would like to confess to a murderer."
And the operator, of course, needs to know where he is. Basic logistics.
And his response is just a logistical headache. He says, "I'm on a street in Montreal. I don't know where that street is." "Well, you need to know if you want to send somebody."
Can you imagine being that operator? Trying to maintain your composure while dealing with a murder confession, and you have to point out the obvious, saying something like, "Well, you need to know if you want to send somebody."
And Cameron's reply is just a stunning acknowledgement of the inconvenience of it all. "Yeah, that's true. That's true." It is less a moment of moral awakening and more like a conversational pit stop.
As if he's trying to navigate a minor bureaucratic snag, rather than reporting a double homicide that he himself committed.
He was completely lost, isolated, physically exhausted after a week of hiding and running when he made that call. But the core exchange is just devastatingly simple.
The operator finally asks,
"And who did you kill?" And Cameron just states it flatly, "My mom and dad." He then had to literally walk up to a street corner to find a name for the operator, yet he had traveled all that way to try and escape the very situation he was
to a
in.
murder.
Okay. Well, so where are you?
I actually, I'm on a street,
Mm-hmm.
in Montreal. I don't know where that street is.
Well, you need to know if you want to send somebody.
Yeah, that's true, Wayne. I'm near a parking garage.
Okay, you need to be more specific. I need an address or intersection.
I'm going to find the street name. An address. Oh, that might work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go up to the corner of the street to see the street name.
And who did you kill?
My mom and dad.
Okay. Where do they live?
They live in Ottawa.
And what's your name?
My name is Cameron.
Cameron.
Cameron Rogers.
How old are you?
I'm 22.
22. Okay. Are you gonna stay on the corner?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. I'll send somebody.
So what does this all mean right at the start? It immediately sets up the core tension of the case, the thing that permeated the entire trial.
Which is?
A horrendous, calculated, premeditated act, confessed by an individual who seems profoundly incapable of processing the meaning or the physical reality of what he had destroyed.
That inability to connect action and consequence. That is the first massive red flag in this deep dive.
Now that we have that immediate, uncomfortable entry point, let's zoom out. Because to really understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to appreciate the world the Rogers family inhabited and the lives that Dave and Meryl had built.
Absolutely. The setting is vital here.
We are in Ottawa, Canada, the nation's capital, specifically in the comfortable, very family-focused riverside suburb of Riverview.
Right, and it's important to remember the context. Canada is statistically a very safe, peaceful, progressive country. Ottawa itself, nestled there on the banks of the river, is a highly desirable, stable, and established city.
This wasn't a family struggling with poverty or some kind of societal dislocation.
Not at all. This was a family built on stability, ambition, and deep community involvement. Their life was comfortable, intellectually stimulating, and they were highly respected.
So let's focus on the victims, Dave and Meryl, because their backgrounds really show this extraordinary strength of character and the profound commitment they ultimately poured into Cameron.
Let's start with Dave Rogers. He was 69 at the time of his death, an Ottawa native through and through.
And his career, it speaks volumes about his dedication. After getting degrees in political science and journalism, he spent his entire professional career, 37 years?
37 years at the Ottawa Citizen newspaper. He wasn't someone who jumped from job to job. He was a pillar of stability and institutional knowledge.
And the source material highlights his consistent positive outlook. I mean, think about it. As a journalist, you're covering what must have often been difficult or traumatic events. But he was known for never complaining and always maintaining this can-do attitude. He was the definition of reliable, a real steadying force in his work and, by all accounts, in his home life.
And then you look at Meryl Glutty Rogers, 63, and the sources just describe her as being tough as nails.
That's the perfect phrase for her, isn't it?
It really is. She was born into a military family in Alberta, and after her linguistics degree at the University of Ottawa, she chose to join the military herself.
And her story in the military is just remarkable. It speaks to her tenacity. Through what was described as a bureaucratic mix-up, her name was mistakenly processed as a man's.
So they enrolled her in men's combat training.
Right. And instead of quitting, what does she do?
She completes the course. She becomes one of the first 4 women to complete that extremely rigorous combat course.
It's incredible.
And then she leverages that experience. She helps to design future training programs for female recruits, ensuring greater inclusion and appropriate difficulty. That level of resilience, that toughness and commitment, both physical and intellectual, it just demonstrates a woman of immense strength and focus.
So you had these 2 incredible people. Dave and Meryl met later in life. They connected through a local cycling group. Married 2 years later, they loved to travel, especially to France, became fully bilingual.
They wanted a family, and when they couldn't conceive naturally, they pursued adoption.
They adopted Cameron as a newborn in 1994, and they were already in their 40s at this point.
And while some might suggest older parents face more challenges, they adapted quickly to parenthood and were just utterly devoted.
Friends describe them as centering their entire lives around Cameron's needs. They loved him completely, unconditionally.
And that devotion continued when Cameron started to struggle academically. They didn't ignore it or sweep it under the rug. They proactively sought support. He was diagnosed with ADHD, and the sources note he was also diagnosed with what they call expected autism.
Expected autism. What does that term mean here?
Yeah, the term used in the sources refers to a clinical presentation where the diagnostic criteria strongly pointed toward an autism spectrum disorder, sometimes managed alongside the ADHD.
I see.
And crucially, the parents remained fully supportive through all of this. They channeled their resources into providing them with what the sources describe as fantastic experiences.
Overseas trips, cruises, significant time exploring Canada's great outdoors.
Exactly. They managed his diagnoses, and they made sure he was exposed to culture and opportunity at every turn.
And this is where the story shifts from that incredible devotion to deep, deep friction. All this love and support, all these opportunities.
It becomes the very thing he resents.
It sets the stage for the specific kind of resentment that grew after high school. Cameron lacked direction after graduation, which naturally worried Dave and Meryl. I mean, they were approaching 70 and were concerned about their son's long-term stability.
Of course. And their actions were entirely rooted in trying to secure his future. They encouraged him to enroll in college for mechanical engineering.
For them, this was stability. For him,
it was control. Cameron saw this guidance as his parents actively trying to dictate his life's trajectory, stifling his independence right at the moment he was trying to establish it.
and this perception of control, it wasn't limited to school. It extended deeply into his finances and his autonomy about work.
Right. Cameron wanted a part-time job, which is a very normal step toward independence for a young person.
But Dave and Meryl, they were concerned about his academic struggles, so they wanted him to focus solely on his studies.
So they tried to find a compromise. And by all external measures, this compromise was incredibly generous. They offered a system where they would purchase anything he wanted, literally anything, free of charge in return for him doing regular household chores and gardening work.
So they were essentially giving him an unlimited allowance. They were trying to replicate the feeling of earning money while removing the time sink of an actual job.
But Cameron's reaction, according to the transcripts, was just overwhelmingly negative.
He absolutely hated this arrangement.
Absolutely hated it. He resented the fact that he had to specify every single purchase, and he saw the entire system as a mechanism by which his parents controlled his finances, his job status, and ultimately his freedom.
And this is the crux of the psychological conflict leading up to the crime.
It really is. The
Yep.
sources note this wasn't just some minor disagreement. This frustration over control over his studies, his money, his career path, it grew and it stayed with him, suppressed below the surface.
Arguments became frequent, heated, escalating to shouting and screaming.
And while nothing ever seemed to change on the surface, the compromise stayed in place. The internal pressure within Cameron was just mounting dangerously. This suppressed resentment, directed at the very people who had given him everything, was setting the stage for a catastrophic consequence.
And that consequence was catastrophic indeed. Let's move now to the actual events of the crime, the deliberation and the ensuing agony that unfolded over so many hours.
The date was Sunday, November 20, 2016.
And the first indication that something was deeply wrong was just how mundane it was. A social expectation was suddenly unmet.
The Rogers family had been invited to a birthday party. They had even promised to bring a dish, and they just never showed up.
Friends and relatives, they initially held back. The Rogers were known as a private family, so maybe they assumed they'd just taken an impromptu trip or something. But the worry grew after days of silence.
9 days passed before that 911 call. But during that time, neighbors noticed a dim light on in a bedroom, which they thought was maybe a timed switch, hinting that the house was unoccupied but trying to appear normal.
What makes the catalyst for all this so profoundly depressing is how incredibly trivial it was. On the morning of the crime, around 11 a.m. on that Sunday, Meryl was in the kitchen. She was preparing herbs for the party dish. And she simply asked Cameron to cut a melon.
And Cameron was already mentally spiraling. He was ruminating intensely on the previous night's argument about school and work. He confessed later that the whole disagreement about school and work and all that was just hanging over me.
He was just saturated with this feeling of being controlled. He wanted his own life, his own way, and he saw his parents as this permanent roadblock.
And while he was performing this mundane task, just slicing the fruit, he confessed that his mind deviated into the realm of disturbing thoughts.
He started to fantasize about using the knife on his mother. His reasoning was that without his parents, they can no longer exert control over him.
Here is where the analysis has to spend significant time, because this is the single most damning piece of evidence against any claim of impulsivity.
The 50 minutes.
The 50 minutes. Cameron confessed to 50 minutes of absurd deliberation. This was not a sudden fit of rage. This was an hour-long, conscious, internal debate. He was going back and forth about to do it and then not to do it.
The sources highlight this 50-minute window because it fundamentally redefines the crime. It wasn't merely a moment of anger fueled by resentment.
No, it suggests an active weighing of options, a conscious push and pull between this desire for absolute autonomy, freedom from parental control, and whatever moral or psychological restraints he still possessed.
50 minutes is a long time. It's sufficient time to walk away, to make a cup of coffee, to distract yourself.
The fact that he remained in that kitchen, deliberately fostering that murderous thought for nearly an hour, it argues powerfully for premeditation.
And if you contrast this 50 minutes with his later claim that he didn't remember the motive, it creates a terrifying picture. He remembered the process, the internal argument, but he denied the conclusion of the argument, the reason for finally choosing violence.
And after those agonizing 50 minutes, he made his choice. He didn't use the knife he was holding.
No. Instead, he went to the garage and retrieved a wooden stake. The sources suggest this was a completely mundane object, maybe used for gardening or temporary support, not intended as a weapon at all.
That deliberate selection, moving away from the immediate opportunity, the melon knife, to find another object, further demonstrates the calculated nature of his intent.
So the actual attack sequence was just brutal. He returned to the kitchen where Merrill was still grinding herbs. He walked directly up to his mother and stabbed her square in the back with the wooden stake. She screamed and fell to the floor.
And the sources emphasize that because the stake was duller than a knife, it caused significant internal injury and immense pain, but it was not sharp enough to kill her instantly.
The screams immediately brought Dave Rogers rushing in from another room.
And before Dave, a man known for his stability and clear reporting, could even comprehend the horrifying scene of his wife on the floor, Cameron thrust the stake into his chest.
This blow was immediately fatal. It punctured Dave's lung, and he passed away almost instantly.
Karen then escalated the violence, grabbing 2 knives from the kitchen counter and stabbing both parents multiple times. But the terror didn't end when the violence stopped. And this is where the sources detail a dimension of agonizing suffering that followed.
This is truly the most chilling moment in the entire case, and it demands our focus. Hours passed, and Merrill was still alive on the kitchen floor, groaning in pain.
And Cameron confessed that he couldn't bear being with her during that moment, so he deliberately stayed outside the room just waiting for her to die.
He was acutely aware of her suffering. He had the opportunity to call 911, which, given the dull weapon used, might have actually saved her life. He had the opportunity to offer comfort.
Instead, he chose to isolate himself and wait. Merrill took, in his own words, the whole night to die. And Cameron stayed upstairs, actively avoiding the consequences of his actions while his mother suffered for hours.
And during that terrible, extended wait, the phone rang.
It was his Uncle Graham calling to speak to Merrill about the party.
And Cameron answered the phone.
He lied effortlessly. He told Graham that Merrill was feeling ill and resting in bed, and he assured him that everything was fine. He maintained this casual facade while his mother lay dying meters away on the floor. It confirms his psychological capacity to suppress reality and actively manipulate others to cover his crime.
When the interrogator later questioned his emotional state during this long wait, he offered this very strange partial confession of guilt.
Yeah, he said, "It was really hard because she was in pain and I wanted it to stop and I couldn't make a stop. And then it felt a little bad because she was in pain and I wanted her not to be in pain, but I couldn't stop it."
If you really unpack that quote, you see a crucial distinction between true empathy and just self-centered aversion.
Exactly. He wasn't distressed because she was dying or suffering. He was distressed because her state of suffering was causing him discomfort. His desire for it to stop was purely selfish.
And he still was unable to perform the one altruistic action calling 911 that would have either saved her or at least ended his own discomfort by bringing in medical help.
That complete failure to act transforms the scene from a crime of momentary passion into an extended, cold, and calculated act of neglect and malice.
So after Merrill finally passed away during the night, Cameron's focus shifted entirely to concealment and cleanup.
His claimed motivation was that he didn't want the extended family to find them, although he insisted he had no plan or intention to evade the law at that specific moment.
A claim which is completely undermined by his immediate actions.
Completely. His attempts at concealment illustrate this profound mismatch between his heinous actions and his really disorganized planning skills.
Yeah.
He waited until they had both died, then he dragged Merrill's body outside in a tarp.
But Dave's body presented a logistical challenge for him because of his size and rigidity.
And the solution he came up with is just horrifying in its absurdity. He rolled his 69-year-old father's body into a large family suitcase and pulled him out of the house.
Into a suitcase?
He then placed both bodies behind a shed in the back garden where they subsequently froze solid due to the harsh Canadian winter. The mental image of that, a man stuffed into luggage, it's a testament to his sheer lack of horror treating his father's body like a large piece of trash to be moved out of sight.
After the body disposal, he turned to evidence removal. He used his parents' steam cleaner to try and get the blood off the kitchen floor.
And he discarded the knives and the broken stake, the primary weapons, in the family's waste bin, which was located in the garage.
All of these actions, the hiding, the cleaning, the disposal of weapons, the lie on the phone, they are direct, undeniable evidence that Cameron knew his actions were profoundly and morally wrong, regardless of his inability to articulate a motive.
He was aware. He knew he had committed a crime that required an active cover-up.
After the cleanup, he settled into what the source material describes as a week-long hibernation.
He stayed inside the house for 7 days after the murders, mostly confined to his bedroom, only venturing out to the kitchen for snacks and food.
He's living in the house where his parents just died, whose bodies are yards away in the freezing garden.
And during this solitary week, he's pondering his next move. He came to the conclusion that he couldn't stay in Canada indefinitely, so he settled on the idea of starting a new life in the United States, planning to cross the border.
Accurately sums up this thinking as naive, impulsive, and thoughtless.
It really was. His escape attempt was just riddled with flaws, once again underscoring his complete lack of foresight about real-world logistics. To finance this journey, he emptied his mother's purse and took the cash.
And he drove her vehicle, but only as far as the Tremblay Road train station.
Right. And the detail about the car is almost comical if the context wasn't so dark. When they asked him why he didn't drive the car all the way to Montreal or to the border, his answer was incredibly pragmatic and small-minded. He said, "Well, I have to pay for gas."
He was prioritizing saving the money he needed for the actual escape route, the train and bus tickets, over the cost of fuel.
So he takes the train to Montreal, arrives at 8:30 in the morning on Monday, and then purchases a bus ticket to New York, setting his sights on the U.S. border.
And this is where the naivete just completely unravels.
Oh, yeah. The border flaw is striking, and it just shows how little planning went into this attempted autonomy. Canadians do not need a visa to visit the United States. But when he was speaking to the border officers, Cameron declared he was looking to move to the U.S. permanently.
Which requires specific immigration documentation, a visa, which he obviously did not have.
That one simple, poorly thought-out statement just killed his entire plan. It demonstrates how delusional his attempt at flight really was.
So now he's lost, alone, and clearly exhausted. Cameron is just wandering the streets of Montreal with nowhere to go. He's run out of road, run out of the mental fortitude to continue the charade.
And at 9:15 p.m., 8 long days after stabbing his parents, he finally calls 911 and confesses.
And that confession immediately directed forensic teams to the house. They spent 5 days meticulously examining the scene, confirming every morbid detail he provided.
Finding the bodies behind the shed, finding the blood evidence, locating the weapons in the garage waste bin. The evidence was secured, and the case moved swiftly into the legal system.
But the core problem of motive remained completely mysterious.
Completely.
So let's turn our attention now to the trial, the lies, and the sentencing, because the legal maneuvers introduced even more layers of complexity and darkness to Cameron Rogers' character.
Right. Because even during the interrogation, he failed to articulate any strong reasoning. He constantly reverted to the claim that it was literally just a spur of the moment, completely ignoring the 50 minutes of internal deliberation.
And the interrogator, she was desperate to find the trigger. She asked, what was causing you to want to do it? Why is it you're thinking you wanted to do it? And Cameron's answer was just always the same.
I don't remember. That denial of motive, that psychological blank slate, was the central challenge the defense had to overcome.
So Cameron was initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. and he pleaded not guilty. The initial defense strategy was to argue for diminished responsibility.
A crucial legal term, especially in Canadian law. It essentially argues that while the defendant committed the physical act, a mental abnormality or impairment significantly reduced their moral culpability and their capacity for criminal intent.
The defense pointed to his diagnosis of expected autism and ADHD, though Cameron himself downplayed this, describing it during interrogation as only slight autism.
The idea was to frame the crime not as cold-blooded murder, but as a consequence of poor impulse control and an inability to regulate his intense, suppressed resentment, all exacerbated by his neurological profile.
But the prosecution had immediate, very strong rebuttals.
I mean, how could they not? The evidence of the 50-minute deliberation proved premeditation, which completely dismantled the spur-of-the-moment claim.
And then there's the sheer cruelty of leaving his mother to suffer and die instead of seeking help. That demonstrated a profound and dangerous lack of human concern.
And, as we detailed, the actions of hiding the bodies, cleaning up, and trying to flee proved moral awareness. He knew his actions were legally and morally wrong, which directly countered the idea that his mental state prevented him from understanding the nature of the crime.
So here's where the legal proceedings took a really dark and highly manipulative turn. The trial began in December 2018. During the defense's opening statements, in what seems like a moment of sheer panic or calculated deflection, Cameron suddenly told his lawyers that his father, Dave Rogers, had sexually abused him for most of his life.
It was an explosive, massive allegation that completely changed the trajectory of the trial. If it had been true, it would have immediately provided the powerful motive the defense lacked.
It could have changed the charges from first-degree murder to manslaughter or self-defense, or at the very least, ensured a much lighter sentence based on provocation and trauma.
Of course. So the legal system just ground to a halt. A mistrial was immediately declared. The jury was dismissed to allow the defense team time to investigate this new, explosive claim against his dead father.
But the allegation crumbled, immediately and spectacularly.
When lawyers pressed him for details, seeking any evidence or specific incidents, Cameron confessed the truth. He had made the allegation up in a panic.
This fabrication is profoundly damning to any later claims of simple psychological confusion.
It is. It suggests a complete lack of genuine remorse for the victims and a chilling willingness to leverage the legal system to destroy his dead father's reputation and cause even more pain to his surviving family, simply to save himself from conviction.
It was a conscious, tactical lie delivered at the highest point of legal pressure. The trial was allowed to continue, but without a jury. The presiding judge would decide his fate.
And during the proceedings, Cameron was confronted with the painful real-world consequences of his actions. The judge heard 24 detailed victim impact statements from friends and family members, many of whom he had grown up with, describing their love for Dave and Meryl and the devastating void Cameron had left.
The accumulated evidence was just overwhelming. It spoke directly to the severity of the act, and it completely overrode the diminished responsibility argument.
The 50-minute deliberation proved premeditation. The concealment proved moral awareness. And the specific, calculated cruelty of allowing his mother to die instead of seeking help demonstrated a dangerous, self-centered, and malicious nature.
So to avoid the further expense and emotional trauma of a protracted trial that he was clearly losing, the judge offered Cameron the option to plead guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder.
Recognizing the overwhelming evidence against him, much of it provided by his own confession and post-crime actions, Cameron eventually resigned himself to the reality and accepted the plea.
The resulting sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole for 20 years. Because he was 22 at the time of the crime, he is technically eligible for release in the year 2038.
He'll be 42 years old.
42. That brings us to our final reflections, looking at the consequences through the eyes of the family and the philosophical tension this case presents.
And we have to introduce the perspective of the extended family, including people like his Uncle Graham, who was the last person to speak to Meryl before she died.
The extended family has made it very clear that they do not welcome the 20-year sentence. For them, that release date represents a real, tangible threat.
Uncle Graham's quoted statement is so stark, and it reflects this widespread fear. He said, "I fear for the day he is released."
And they interpret Cameron's actions, hiding the bodies, trying to flee, and especially that calculated, fabricated abuse allegation, not as signs of diminished capacity or confusion.
No, they see it as direct evidence of his profound selfishness and his utter willingness to try to get away with this. Their perspective emphasizes calculation over confusion.
And this fear is not localized. The source notes that victim impact statements poured in from family members all across North America, from the West Coast to the southern U.S.
It reflects a continent-wide shared concern about the danger he poses. They view his initial vague motive resentment over autonomy as something calculated to serve his own ends. They argue that a person who can fabricate such a heinous lie against a dead victim is fundamentally dangerous.
And this sets up the central philosophical tension of the entire case.
Right. On the one hand, you have a perpetrator whose initial presentation suggests this profound emotional detachment and confusion, the I don't know confession. But then you also have all this evidence of cold, calculated malice.
The 50 minutes of deliberation, the extended suffering of his mother, the act of concealment, and the devastating attempt to manipulate the court.
This is the crux of the moral difficulty the case presents. The source material contrasts the family's deep fear with the suggestion that Cameron requires psychological evaluation and support much more than he deserves to be feared.
But can an individual be simultaneously thoughtless and naive, as his escape attempt was, yet also demonstrably cold and heartless, as his deliberation and subsequent failure to intervene suggests?
It forces you to balance the need for accountability and justice with the complex, non-standard psychological profile he presented.
So what does this all mean for the legacy of Dave and Merrill Rogers? They dedicated the later, most stable part of their lives, 2 full decades, to raising an adopted son who had a difficult start.
They gave him unconditional love, financial stability, and every opportunity they could possibly muster.
They were pillars of their community, a dedicated journalist and a tenacious military woman who centered their lives completely around his needs, and that deep, abiding love and care were ultimately thrown back in their faces in the most violent and cold way possible.
Murdered over a perceived loss of autonomy regarding money and school. They will be sorely missed by their friends, their church, and their devastated extended family.
And as for Cameron Rogers, he will eventually have a shot at freedom at age 42. But as the source material concludes, he will first have to live the next quarter of his life in what is described as miserable loneliness.
The heavy, all too expected price for murdering the 2 people who loved him the most.
If we leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, consider this. Cameron's attempt to leverage his diagnosis of slight autism as a mitigating factor, immediately followed by the cynical, calculated, and harmful fabrication of a serious sexual abuse allegation against his dead father, presents a profound challenge.
A challenge to how the legal system and society must assess character, remorse, and moral culpability in crimes driven by deep internal resentment. How do we, as a society, balance the community's need for justice and protection against the genuine psychological complexity of a perpetrator who may operate on an emotional framework that we simply cannot comprehend?
It challenges our very definition of what constitutes a remorseful individual, and when we can trust their claims of confusion versus calculation.
A deeply complex and unsettling case that forces us to look closely at the thin line between resentment and lethal action, and the terrifying void of a confessed motive.
Thank you for diving deep into this source material with us today. We'll see you next time.